Hi YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So, carrying on with the build on the D2 Evo. Couple of things that I've gone back over since I've started this build. The 4 little screws holding the little plates to the back of the chassis. I've put a bit of thread lock on them even though it doesn't say do it. And for me, the outputs on the output cups, I've dropped them back out and put a little bit of graphite grease on the output cups because it doesn't tell you to do it, and we've got a bit of silicone in there from the diff anyway, but for me it just feels a bit better with some silicone grease on the outputs of it. I do like the hoodie silicone grease, seems to work well in all the rest of my RCs. The only problem is with it gets everywhere. So we're on to bag G, which is going to be the arms. So let's bring in for a close-up look and show you where all these bits go. Right, so initial build is asking you for your center zero positions on the pills. So we've got the arms laid out in the order that these are going to go together in. So we want to start by getting his little pills, and these just push in. And as I say, I'm just building this completely as the manual suggests. So these are all going to be in the center position. And again, put all the spares in a little bag. So we're going to be putting one of them in each side. Then we've got a 1mm spacer, and again these are the really nice anodized shims. Then we're going to be putting an arm on each side. Then it's asking for 2 more 1mm shims. So we get these into position. And then we're going to be closing it up with the opposite side. So you should have something that resembles that. Over to the RC itself. So let's move that to one side. And then we're going to be positioning the entire of this onto the back of it. And I believe if we get these right, they should sort of lock into position or sit down into position. So they're on there pretty good. Then we're going to have to get the screws in from underneath, which is going to be fun. Let's see if I can do this without everything falling all over the place. So if you get that into position, then we're going to need a little bit of thread lock. And the easiest way I find of doing this is to just try and carefully get a little bit of thread lock down into these holes, which is going to be fun because these holes go all the way through and out the other side. So once we get that in, we're going to have to drop our screws in. And let's have a look, see what size these are. They should be 2mm. So this will get easier and easier as we get some screws in. So I'll just start by loosely getting them in. And I think this is the first RC where I've had the rear ones split into. Now, I'm not sure if there's any benefit to this, but certainly if you damage one, should be easy to replace. And just remember with this, because we've got thread lock on it, you don't need to go insanely overboard tightening these up. As the thread lock's going to do its work and prevent them from coming undone anyway. So let's just wipe any excess thread lock off, and then we can clean up this side. Not as bad as it could have been to get that on, must admit. So we've got his arms on and they're looking pretty good. All tightened down and they do feel nice and free. So let's crack on with next part. Right, so at this point the instructions have completely lost the plot. So it tells us to open bag G, which is only half of this. G2, sorry, which is only half of this, and the other half of this is in G3, which it doesn't tell us to open yet. So I'll just show you that. So basically it just says G2, and we've got this, and half of this is in bag G3 that it then doesn't tell us to use until we get onto that step. That's not the parts that are in G3. So I definitely recommend going online and downloading the updated instruction set. Hopefully they've fixed that. But this is basically what we need to do. I have put more grease, more oil, hoodie oil in these bearings. So we're going to need some bearings in here. So I'm going to start by dropping them in, and then that's going to be the shaft, so that pops in there. Then that goes on. Or do we not have a bearing on that side? Is the instructions right? Are they going to have that suspended at the other side? Possibly motor mount? We shall see. But that's how it's telling us to put it together. So let's see how we end up. Well, we're definitely going to need a bearing on that side because that sits inside the gear housing. So at this point I'm going to go with some grease. Let's see if we've got any graphite grease left. This stuff is fantastic but gets absolutely everywhere. But it does work exceptionally well in all my X-ray cars. So we'll stick that in and then that can work its way around. So once we've got that together, looks like we're then going to sit this inside. And you do have like a channel to get this lined up in, and it has got some little sort of standoffs, if you like, on either end, and they locate into the other part. So we can now work as graphite grease around. I'll probably put some more of that in as we work our way through. So we've then got this screw that goes all the way through. So we're going to get a bit of thread lock on this one. And that definitely looks like it's a lot bigger than 2mm. Yep, we got a 2.5mm in this one. I think looking at the design of this, the bearing carrier is probably on the outside of this one, but it's definitely thrown me with the instructions being a bit sort of like steps are missed out. I'm just going to get a little bit more graphite grease on here. Right, so next part, we have these little bits, and they need to mount up on the outside. So it shows these facing backwards, so it looks like they're going to sit in that position. And then we've got a longer screw that goes in the uppermost hole and a shorter one in the lower hole. So again, I'm going to get a bit of thread lock on these. So longer screw in the top. Shorter screw in the bottom. So it looks like that's what it's asking us for. And it says they should face backwards. Then you want your little washer or shim or spacer, but it's 1mm. And a little bit of thread lock on this again. And the stock build is asking for this to be in the innermost position with the 1mm shim or spacer. In all fairness, it does tell you to go online and download the latest version of manual, so I'm guessing this is packaged up for the later manual. But we're all experts and we know better, so we can't be bothered. So again, that's the longer screw to the utmost position. Shorter screw to the lower one. We're going to get us 1mm spacer, and I'm going to have to get some more thread lock by the looks of this. This is going to mount up to the innermost of the two holes. We'll tighten that down. I'm still looking through this, and these are definitely impressive parts. Definitely got a lot of quality to this kit. So that's what we should end up with. Now let's move on to the next part. Right, so I've opened the next bag, but it looks like these are the parts that we're going to be using. So left from the first bag, we've got a bearing, the motor mount, we've got the cover and 3 little assorted screws. And then from the bag we now open to get all these parts out, we've got a whole bunch of little screws left, which look like the screws that come from bottom, but there's these 2 weird ones. So I can't see anywhere on this step that it's asking us for them. So let's crack on with the assembly of it. Right, so first thing it's asking us to do is to put this into position. So you want one of the longest screws, and then we want this support, and that goes through and screws on. So they are marked R and L, and you have the sort of little dimple bits to get it into position. I thought building them might be a bit more awkward than it actually is, but they go together really nice. So once they're together, we then, looks like we're going to mount the shock tower. So we're going to need a little bit of thread lock, and it looks like it's asking us to use the longer screws, so let's get some thread lock on these. So these are all going to be 2mm, and they are through carbon into aluminium, so we're not going to have to go crazy tight with these. You have got thread lock on as well, which is going to hold them in position. But then once we've got this down, should be able to nip these up, and there we have it. It looks actually quite nice, and carrying on with theme, just really high quality components on this. So once we've got that built, we're then going to have to pop a shock towers in place. So these are going to go through the second one in from the outermost, is what it's calling for stock. And then again, tiny bit of thread lock on these, and then we can get a standoffs that are also incredibly high quality by the looks of it. So that is the entire of the shock tower assembled. Then when we move on from this one, it's calling for the diff to be fitted, and the stock height is 1 dot facing upwards on his adjustable diff shims. So we get them into position, and this should just lower down into the diff housing. Let's see how easy these go in. So just take your time to get them into position, and then they do sit in really nicely. And so far there doesn't seem to be any binding. I am going to try and get a little bit more of this graphite grease onto these gears, and as we run it, it will work its way around everywhere, because that's what graphite grease is really good at. Right, so moving on to the final part, is we should be closing the diff casing. So there's no resistance there. That feels really smooth. So we've got 4 screws. They're going to go in the 2 innermost at the back and just the 2 front ones. So let's get some thread lock on go and get those screwed in. So let's carry on. Right, the next thing it's asking us to do is fasten it into the actual RC itself. So if we get this into position and then flip it upside down, so it's telling us to use all these. So we've got the 2 at the front, and these are going to be into plastic, so we can get these 2 screwed in. So we're not going to need to be using thread lock on these ones. Then we got a whole bunch at the back, so we're going to go with these holes and these holes, and we're going to have to put 4 of these in. So get all 4 of the rear ones into position first, and then you can just tighten them down, and just finish off by nipping the front ones up. And we can get rid of any excess thread lock, and we should have all the diff assembled and fitted to the back of the RC. So let's have a look what else we've got. Right, so moving on, we're going to get this part, and it's telling us to put the screws through from this side. So I'm going to pop a tiny bit of thread lock on these. So it looks like it wants us to fit this from the inside out, and then just tighten these down. Certainly the latter stages of the instruction manual look like they could do a bit of work. They're a little awkward to follow, not impossible, but certainly a little bit. So we've got us bearing sat in the carrier, and I have put some hoodie oil on that. Looks like this one sits in this sort of position. So once we've got that in that position, we're going to flick it over, and then it looks like you've got these two screws that have got the weird little flats on them. So the tiny little screws for the sort of cover, they were 1.5mm, and these are 2. I just want to get them backed off because we've got this little flathead screw, and it looks like that goes into the top part. So let's get a little bit of thread lock on this. So that'll lock that into position for us. Then I'm going to put a little bit of thread lock on these. With these being on a slide, I wasn't entirely sure if we're going to need to move these, but it looks like that top one locks it in position, so I don't think we'll be needing to move these. So we can now get these thread locked up. Right, let's see what else we've got. Right, so a slipper assembly. We're going to want a slipper pad in either side of the slipper clutch, or a spur gear. Try and drop that in. Then you're going to want that one on the back and the one with the cutout on the front. We're going to want to line it up. Then you should spin it round, and then you can drop the pin through to align it all so it's nice and free. Then you're going to want one of these, and you're going to want the smaller of the slots to the back, and then the bigger one for the spring to sit on, and same again on the outer side of it. Then as little 5.5mm knot, and then we tighten that down, and I believe the stock setting is so it just sits flush. So it's just meant to sit flush with the end, and then you can adjust from there. Now that is way too loose, so let's see where it just starts getting some tension on it. So for me it's just starting to bite with about 1mm thread showing through it, but it's very easy to set them up as you start driving. So that is the slipper clutch all assembled, and it's moving quite free. So let's crack on, see what else we've got. Right, so moving along, we are on the drive shafts that it's telling us to build in the medium position. So if you look, you've got short, medium, long, 3 dots, and for the stock build it's telling us medium. So this is where we get absolutely covered in graphite grease. So we're going to get one of these and cover it in graphite grease, stick it through, a little bit more graphite grease, and then we'll be able to look, if we get enough graphite grease it'll stick as pins in. and these are the narrower of the pins that you're going to be getting in this bag. So you want to line it up with the center hole, because it's telling us to build it to the medium spec. And just be careful when you get these through that you actually get it through the pin. You really need to make sure you get this onto the drive pin and you don't miss, because you will have drive shafts popping out all over the place. Pop it through and give it a good tug about, make sure it's got hold of it properly. But that is the drive shafts assembled, and me completely covered in graphite grease, which is not at all the par for course when building drive shafts, honestly. Right, let's crack on with build. Right, so moving on. It does look like, according to the setup sheet, this is what it's asking us to do. Unfortunately, the setup sheet says we need 2mm at the either side of them and 2mm on the tops, and it doesn't actually give you enough washers to do that. Unless they're in one of other bags. We have 2 spare left from earlier, but we'd need 4. So the other bit is it's not exactly clear on which way round we meant to put these, because they are offset and it doesn't tell you. So it looks like we're going to need one of these, and then we're going to need one of the button head screws. So we're going to need a bit of thread lock on these, and we're also going to need a bit on them too. So we're going to start with our first one, and we're going to have to put a 1mm spacer on, because we don't have the amount that it tells us we need in the setup sheet. So we'll get one screw started, then I'm going to get the second one through and put a spacer on the back of this one. And the only thing I can do is build it and see if it fits, and if it doesn't, we're going to have to spin this round, because it's really not clear in instructions which way round this goes. But building it to the stock setup, we're now going for the center position with a 1mm spacer on that. Then it's turners, these go one dot facing down. So we have one assembled. So we've got them all built up, and the longest parts are to the front. So next we're going to be trying to fit these onto the actual RC, and its turners. We should have these set up with 2mm on each side of this. So let's fit as bearings inside, and you've got to carefully drop one of your drive shafts through and just make sure your pin doesn't pop out. But let's see where we need these spacers. So we've got the retaining screws coming through from the outside. So let's try and get 2mm on that. Then we're going to need the hub in position. And then the fun part, we've got to try and get these little spacers on the end of that. So it definitely looks like there is room for 2 1mm spacers, and it does look like it fits in there nicely. it's not telling us to put anything other than the lock nut on the end. So we'll get that into position, and I believe these are quite small, they're only 5mm. So then you're going to need to nip this up, but don't over tighten it because you'll be then trying to crush things. But it does feel quite nice and free. We then gonna have one of these to pop on. And it does feel quite nice. Then you're going to want one of your drive pins. Let's pop that through. Then you're going to want one of these tiny little screws and the hex drive. They're going to be 1.5mm. So if we get that set into position, then we should be able to nip it up. It does feel quite nice. So let's try and repeat that on the other side. And we are looking very RC shaped. So let's see what the final parts have got in store for us. Right, so first off, it's asking for two 1mm spacers to go on the bottom mount for the shock, giving us 2mm in total. So we'll pop these on. Then we want a shock with the flat facing backwards, and I like to have the bleed screw facing out. Get that in position on top and bottom, and then finally we want one of the 0.5mm shims or washers, whatever you want to call them. Then we're going to want a lock nut. And on the bottom, it's not saying use any shims or washers on the front, just a lock nut. So let's get these tightened up. Then we're going to go for exactly the same on the opposite side. So moving on, we now have the front shocks, and on these we have these little screws. So I'm going to have that facing outwards. We're going to put it into position. We're going to pop that on. You are going to want one of the tiny washers. I think these are 0.5mm. I do really like that the shocks sit back, so they do give you a useful tool, which I'm not entirely used to seeing with RC cars. You usually get tools that are not totally useful. So front suspension says outermost. So that's the outermost hole on here, on the arm that we're running. And we get the final shock put in place. Doesn't tell you how deep to screw these in, which I find a bit strange. Does feel pretty nice on suspension, must admit. And everything's feeling pretty smooth, no binding, which is quite nice. Right, let's have a look what else we've got. So, moving along, we have our Wtf Rc servo, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to say to HB Racing, thank you so much for putting a decent quality metal servo arm in the kit. This is literally the only race RC that I own that actually comes with a decent, properly supplied servo arm. So if we have to pay this much for them to come with it, yeah, I mean, I bought other X-ray kits that have been more expensive than this for bigger scale RC, yeah, but they still come with plastic servo arms. So yeah, thank you for that. And it's a 25 tooth spline, not the useless 23 tooth that Spectrum and some others use. But moving on. So we're going to be building this up. It's telling us we want a 0.5mm shim on the end of here. So this is going to be our little steering link. And it doesn't give you a measurement for this because I believe you're meant to screw it all the way in. And then the sort of 0.5mm shim is just designed to give you the space between them. So we want to screw this together. And it does say just use one of the spacers. And you're going to want this at an offset. So let's see if I can get the offset right for it, looking at instructions. So we're going to want one end in and one end facing down. So you're going to want it that way. Then we're going to need this. And we're going to need this with no spacer. So it's telling us to screw that through. This one's going to be 2mm. And then it is telling us to put a lock nut on back. Which, believe it or not, I have seen these things shake loose in racing. And it's not good when you lose your steering. So far I've been quite lucky, it's not happened to me, but I have seen these little things work their way loose. So it's telling us we need to pop that into place, and I've got this centered at the minute, so we then want this quite large edged screw. Looks like that's a 2.5mm. Yeah, it is. So once we've got that in place, we're then going to have to put 4 screws into these 2 mounts, and each one of these is going to be using a 0.5mm shim. And the kit does include some spacers for the servo, so if we get it into position and realise it needs sitting slightly further back, we do have 2 different size shims that we can move it and move it back or forward with. And we're definitely not going to be able to tighten them up once we get it in, so it's just going to be a case of pop them in and really hope that they line up. I've not had any issues with Wtf Rc fitting in anything else, so it'd be a first if it didn't want to fit in this. And that is really stiff. But it does go on. And I've not put thread lock on the servo. I don't tend to run thread lock on any of them. But it does look like we're going to be quite lucky, and this does look like it lines up quite well. See if I can get it started. Well, it does fit. And it does just clear it. It's very close, but it does clear it. I don't think I'll actually have the steering going that far, but if I need to, it does. So we have the little wing mounts with 4 little retaining screws. And there's multi-position holes for these to go in, but it's all going to depend on how you want the vehicle driving and your personal preference to wing height. And these are just 2mm hex screws. Right, so there we have it. It's almost finished. I'm going to cut the video there because I've still got the speedo and motor and everything to decide what I'm running, and I've got to paint the body shell and the wing. Now overall I would say the build's been pretty good. There are definitely some weird issues with this RC. The diff, although it feels perfectly smooth now, I did have to reseat it a few times to get it to feel like this. And at the moment there's no tight spots or anything, and all these 4 screws are down properly, but you do have to take it in and out and wiggle it, and then it does seem to drop in, but it does feel fine at the moment. The wheel nuts and the axles, so that's the wheel nuts tightened all the way up. So on most standard racing wheels, these aren't going to work. I do believe you can just change the wheel nuts and that'll fix that, or you're going to have to run a shim or a washer on it to bring it further out on the axle. Not entirely sure if other people have had issues with the diff, but if your diff does feel weird, take it off, reseat it, make sure the diff's all in, and that'll fix that. But no real concerns, just gotta test it and see what we think. I will be taking this to one of our local RC tracks and show a few people there, see what they make of it. But definitely the high points of it is the build quality of all the parts, the extras that you get with it. Everything's aluminium, there's very little plastic on it. Do like the way that you've got your fan mount built in for your motor. That's a really simple addition, but again on an X-Ray the fan mounts are extra, and you buy the fan mount and there's no way to mount a fan to it, so I don't know what X-ray are thinking there. And the fact that you get a decent metal servo arm with it, finally a car manufacturer gives you that without you having to buy it. Because let's face it, you put the plastic ones on, they last half a race, or 2 or 3 laps, and then they just shear off. But enough of my incessant ramblings. I'm going to wrap this one up because it's been long enough. So, thanks again for watching WTF RC Cars. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share to friends and family, and I'll catch you guys again in the next one.